Good afternoon and welcome to the Bull Market Stock Show. This is your host Rand SLUMPS, and we're doing actually today. The rand is actually slumping. This morning it was. Yesterday it was trading at about 15, I think around 15.80, and it's the last time I checked it was sitting at about 16.20, and it looks like it's getting a bit worse now. There's quite a lot of things that are affecting the rand now. It's one is obviously internal factors, and two we have the external factors. Now, the internal factors is the price producer index actually that came out this morning, and then also we had the CPI number that came out. Both of them were basically terrible. And then we have the big one, which is actually Eskom. Now, that is one hell of a problem, which Eskom is fighting with the Department of Environmental Affairs and all the activists that are there. So there's a bit of a mixed match story, and honestly, that can be one hell of a problem for Eskom and for South Africa entirely. It can hit us actually tremendously economically, our livelihoods, everything. Now that is now if Eskom complies. Then we have the last factor. Then we have the Federal Reserve that looks like that they will start to taper more aggressively tonight. Now that news will be out at about I think it's about 9 o'clock South African time. That is where that news will be out, and that is where we'll know, will the Federal Reserve become more aggressive to actually contain the inflation story in the United States, or will they actually keep the pace of how it is now? Now, let me start first with the big machine that is now of Eskom. Look, I think South Africa is not paying much attention to that story, and I was Googling a few things, and that is to do with the environmental affairs of South Africa. And then we have Eskom. Now, the media headline, and that is for me funny, it actually goes that Eskom needs to pollute more. Like, the thing is like Eskom needs to generate more electricity, not pollute more. They need to create actually, or to need to actually get more energy. Now, South Africa has a capacity, or Eskom has a capacity of 45,000 megawatts, which we can produce. We are not actually at optimum. We are actually about 30,000 there around. So we are not using all our facilities to generate actually electricity. Now, the big story is Eskom needs to produce more power, and they say actually that Eskom can't because they are polluting, and they've been polluting for quite some time now. So that is actually where the big debate comes in. Now, South Africa needs to actually comply with the emission structures of the COP20 whatever, which is now the Paris Accord story, that we need to comply and we need to reduce our emissions. You know what? I actually hate that whole entire story about the emissions, because obviously we in fact South Africa don't have electricity anyway, and now we actually need to comply with this COP Paris Accord nonsense story as well. Now there's two arguments about this whole power generation of Eskom, and obviously we all know that these big rich nations came in with a lot of money that we need to go green overnight, and that will not happen. For Eskom to actually now to keep on the lights and not move to stage 8, they need to spend an additional 300 billion to contain this emissions, or actually reduce the emissions, and that will cost us about 300 billion additionally. Now, the initial tariff that Eskom are basically informed or will ask next year is 20%. If we need to comply with everything, with this whole emission story that is now the headline, then it means Eskom needs to add an additional 10% on the 20%, which means it will be 30%. I think the media didn't actually understand what that lady was saying, and I don't know why nobody is screaming about it. Most people are screaming in favor of renewables. Look, it's not easy. We can not just switch to renewables and then that's it. It just doesn't work like that. Things need to get built. Now, which means we will pay about 30% tariff next year, April, if we need to comply. Now, that's why Eskom is asking for mediation with the Department of Forestry. Now, I don't know will that work, but if Eskom lose, then it means we will go to stage 8 load shedding, and that means a blackout. Now, this is a few clips that I actually got for you guys regarding that story.
Waste which will be produced. But the impact of the decision that's been made by the authorities is that there is 16,000 megawatts of capacity, which if we comply, we will need to switch off immediately with immediate effect. And that would result in stage 8 load shedding continuously. So we have appealed the decision, and we have asked for remediation. So we hope to engage with the DMRE, the DPE, the Department of Environment, and find a balanced solution which improves and reduces the impact on health, but also addresses the financial burden that this will create and ensures that we can have a just energy transition. So we're also saying that we should be spending money on implementing renewable technologies rather than spending money on end-of-pipe solutions for stations which are very near the end of their life and will shut down in the next 10 to 15 years.
So it's going to cost you more money to keep these power stations going. At the same time, you won't be able to generate 16,000 megawatts of power that could put us into stage 8. And you're also, as Eskom, asking for a 20% increase as well. It's a difficult time to be involved with Eskom, isn't it?
Yes, so the proposal that we put forward to the authorities has a price tag of about 67 billion, so it's a phased and prioritised approach. But the full compliance that the authorities are requesting of Eskom is 300 billion rand, and that would have at least another 10% additional on the tariff. So we're talking about the 20%, but this 300 billion rand would result in an additional 10% on the tariff.
And that's the story. So it means that, look, if Eskom complies, then it means Eskom needs to switch off a third of its generation capacity, which is about 16,000 megawatts that they need to switch off. And if they don't switch off and they comply, then they need about 300 billion to actually to reduce this emissions. Now they need to basically to upgrade old plants so that they can keep the lights on with a price tag of 300 billion. It just doesn't fucking add up. Honestly, it doesn't. And, the whole thing of this fucking COP20 Paris Accord nonsense is just a whole bunch of nonsense. And the thing is, now we need to somehow pay this brunt. So which means the tariffs for next year, it will be 30% that we have to pay for electricity, 30% more for electricity. It's going to be totally madness. So I'm just not sure. They can actually just grant Eskom this whole thing, let they bloody generate electricity until 2030, and then they can look at the whole thing afterwards and then switch off. But on the other side, there's also another argument. There's a lot of people that are getting sick in the surrounding areas of Eskom where they actually produce this energy. And also that people get all sorts of strokes and high blood pressure and you name it, if they don't actually reduce the emissions. Now, I also got a clip on that.
That's until 2030. It already has temporary space to emit about 3,500. Just how damaging is that to the environment?
That is significantly above what is deemed adequate by the World Health Organization. In fact, they did update those standards in September this year. So we're operating with relatively weak minimum emission standards compared to the rest of the world. And Eskom is submitting significantly more than what is deemed, there is no safe air pollution level. Even the smallest amounts do have detrimental impacts on health. But Eskom is operating above what any other country is at this stage. Air quality has been linked to a number of health impacts, which Eskom continues to minimize and pretend that they don't actually have the impact that it has on the public at large. And we're seeing this in the form of cardiovascular disease, stroke, respiratory diseases, especially in the coal belt area, the high veld area. You'll see many children are afflicted by asthma, bronchitis, and most recently, poor air quality has been linked to eyesight deterioration as well as mental health deterioration. So the impacts of this are massive and they spread across health. The CSIR Center of Science Institute and Research released a report earlier this year that showed that air quality in South Africa has actually caused close to 5,000 deaths annually. And this is a massive amount. There has been a number of research put out over the years, specifically looking at Eskom, which is responsible for about 333 deaths a year, but this number could have significantly increased since that report was released. So the impacts are massive, and Eskom continues to increase its emissions despite the being cautioned not to do so, despite minimum emission standards, or at least the guidelines for air quality being strengthened across the world. However, South Africa has not caught up with these developments.
That is the other argument. Look, to be honest and be fair to you, you will never get a perfect solution for anything. There's always consequences, whichever side I'm on. For example, if I now go to say Eskom needs to generate electricity, which I'm in favor of, you have to look what is the consequences of that. Obviously, you will have the consequences, as the female was saying, that listen here, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have approximately 5,000 people that are dying, or people have all sorts of other respiration problems. That's one side of the problem. If Eskom do comply with them, now that means load shedding states 8. On top of that, you will have obviously you have companies that will definitely close. On top of that, you will not get water because the water needs to get pumped out of the reservoirs. And then obviously you will have entirely chaos in the economy and in the country if we go to stage 8, because that means it's a total blackout. So there's always two sides of the story. It's not that just one side of the story is absolutely right. So there's always consequences. So you need to look with which one you can deal with. And then that is, you have to take a decision and which one you can deal with. You can't just say that, listen, yeah, switch off this light because obviously it's killing people. But what is the consequences of it? And that is actually where the debate comes in, and I hope Eskom will push this one through. But the story is that Eskom was denied the application actually to generate more power. But as the media is saying, they are polluting. Now that is the Eskom story. On the other side, we have this. We have the rand that is actually plummeting. And this was all to do, not much with the inflation, but this has to do with the price producer index that came out this morning. Now, this is actually, it's been calculated, I think, since 2013. That is where it started. And it's literally sitting on a high since it was recorded. And this is about, I think, 9.6. That is actually where our PPI is actually standing on. That is very dangerous. That means that inflation will actually still go up because of the PPI number that was actually produced. So the prospects of inflation going up, that is very high because obviously the producers are actually asking more. Now, what has that to do with the rand? That means definitely a weaker rand. And obviously the Reserve Bank will need to act on that. For me, I think the Reserve Bank, or South African Reserve Bank, needs to act now aggressively and don't. I just hate the idea if they play actually catch up with inflation, because then it means there's panic, and then on top of that, they need to raise interest rate quite aggressively. South Africa did experience this before. That was now under Tumbweni, and he had no mercy. He was literally pumping the interest rates through the roof. Now, this is the other story of the CPI number. This is the CPI number. I actually made a comparison here where I have the CPI number and I have the inflation number and also the interest rates. So this is the inflation. This is now in blue. And then we have actually in the dotted line, we have the interest rates. Now, this is what normally happens, obviously, when inflation comes up and then the Reserve Bank is actually also increasing its interest rates. That's what we all know. Now, if you look at inflation, inflation is actually moving up. The last time that the interest rates here was around 8%. This is now we call it actually not the prime rate, the repo rate, that was at about 7.5% there around, though. That is actually the prime rate. So that looks highly possible that we need to have a faster move up for the Reserve Bank actually to curb this inflation of spreading actually further. Because of this move here of the PPI, this one looks actually very persistent, and it looks like it's moving up sharply. So they need to control it by lifting up the interest rates, which is in the dotted line. You can see here, at this current situation, we are behind the curve or behind inflation. We're supposed to be on top of inflation. So it means that the Reserve Bank needs actually to come up, unless there's evidence that says that inflation will go down in maybe in the near future, but which I doubt that will happen, because obviously we have Eskom that will ask about 20% tariffs or 30% tariffs, and then you have the possible, you also have supply chain problems. So the problems are there. The thing is that what will the Reserve Bank will do? I think the Reserve Bank will just come up and push up the interest rates quite aggressively to bring down this inflation number here. Because if this inflation is hitting over the upper end, or actually at over the 6% mark, then we're sitting with one hell of a problem, and then we need to lift up the interest rates very quickly. So it's a very dangerous game that the Reserve Bank is playing. But I'm actually impressed that they did start to move, but I think they need to move actually quite aggressively because of this PPI number that was actually quite scary. And also we have the story of Eskom that actually it looks like Eskom is going to charge actually a heavy tariff coming April. And that is actually one hell of a concern. And then the last part of the show is actually the Reserve Bank that will come tonight. That will also hit South Africa quite negatively. If the Reserve Bank is actually aggressive, the Reserve Bank that is now of the United States, of the Federal Reserve, if they are aggressive tonight, then it means there will be more pressure on the Rand. And when the Rand is weaker, that means that oil prices are going up, or all import prices are going up, and that will lead to more inflation. So actually, the Reserve Bank of South Africa is a bit in a catch-22. I know they don't want to lift up interest rates quickly because obviously we have the consumer that's still on credit, buy houses, and all of those things. And then you have on the other side, you have inflation that is going out of control. So I think the best alternative is actually to lift up the interest rates before the Federal Reserve is getting actually a bit of aggressive. I think they will get aggressive tonight. But the moment the Reserve Bank of the United States is getting aggressively, I think that is where South Africa need also to get more aggressive with the interest rates, just actually to suppress the inflation number, because that 5.5% inflation number of today is actually a bit scary. And with that producer price index number, that is also a bit scary because it shows the persistence of inflation. So they need actually to act now before it's actually too late. But for tonight with the Federal Reserve, that is actually one hell of a story. I don't know what the hell the Federal Reserve is going to do. Will they actually move tapering faster, or will they quicker? I will just guess, and I think they might actually do a tapering, which is actually what the market is actually speculating, that they will increase the tapering to 30 billion, and then that will end tapering in March and not in June, in March, and then they will also pave the way of lifting up the interest rates. If the Federal Reserve is very hawkish tonight, that will be devastating for everybody across the world, especially South Africans, and also it can hit the stock market quite hard actually tonight. That is now if the Federal Reserve is actually aggressively. If they are not aggressively tonight, or not hawkish or dovish actually, then it means you will see a weaker dollar, you will have your commodity prices going up, you will also see the Rand also strengthening. But that we need to wait for tonight, because I was disappointed in the Federal Reserve for several times now, so I will not speculate. I would rather wait for what they're saying tonight, and that is actually where I will place my trades afterwards. So for now, I'm totally out of the market. I don't care what the hell is happening. I will just actually concentrate on what they're saying tonight, and that is where I will start to place my trade. I hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube page, and please be aware if I'm kicked off of Facebook, which will be anytime soon. And then at least you can find me on YouTube and then also on my website. That is it from my side for today. I will see you guys tomorrow at the same time at 4 o'clock. Bye-bye.